Welcome to Masters of Product Management, powered by Sequent Learning Networks, a show that provides extraordinary insights for product managers who want to go faster and farther in their product management careers.
Hello, this is JJ Rory, Vice President at Sequent Learning Networks. In our Masters of Product Management podcast, we tap into the experiences of people who work in and around product management to help you learn and grow in your product management career. Most of us have been working in a remote fashion for the past year or so. We're recording this in early to mid 2021. And of course, the COVID pandemic has forced us to live and work in a remote fashion. Now, many organizations, of course, had a remote type of approach before COVID, but it certainly has broadened the scope of people and the types of organizations that are now working from home. Now, there's a lot of discussion out there about whether co-location and being in a physical office is best for product management and innovation, or if remote work can be just as effective. I would personally say there's not really one right answer. There are certainly pros and cons to both of those approaches, of course. And I think some organizations have a culture that lends itself better to in-person, some to remote. You certainly can open up the talent pool if you go remote and have people work from anywhere. But again, I think there are pros and cons. But as we've learned over the last year to year and a half, sometimes we have to exist and optimize for a remote, not in-person environment. And so today's conversation is all about being successful in product management when we're in remote teams. So joining me today is Kevin Urrutia, co-founder of Voy Media. Kevin is a programmer and developer turned into a marketer. Kevin, that may be my favorite bio ever. Straight and to the point. Thanks for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you for having me, JJ. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. Okay, so you guys at Voy work with clients in a remote fashion. You also have a SaaS product called Metrics Box there. So tell me a little bit about how it's been working remotely on everything and kind of specifically what does a normal week look like for your team?
Yeah, so at least for here, Voy, so basically we do a lot of like advertising management for a lot of clients. So at least for us, it's interesting with this whole like remote work was our company initially was always like this half remote, half based in New York City. That's where I'm based out of. That's kind of like where half our employees are at. And Wilson, who's the other founder of Voy Media, he was kind of like a traveling nomad. So every 6 months, he would live somewhere else. So he was in Chile, he was in Argentina, he was in Taiwan, Hong Kong for a little bit, right? So we always had like this half remote, half in office. And it was always like, I tell people like, there's always this tension, right? Like, and this is like that tension as in like bad thing was me and Wilson always like sometimes talk at night, be like, hey, like, what do we want Voy to be? Do you want it to be remote? Do you want to be like in office? You know, kind of like, because it was always half and half. And then when pandemic hit, it pretty much solved it for us, right? It's like, oh, okay, we're going to be fully remote. Right? So yeah. But like, even before this, we kind of, my background and Wilson's background, we were programmers. So we always knew remote was a thing. And we implemented it in our company before the pandemic that every Wednesday, everybody can work from home. And the reason why we did it was because I think we initially, like, we already had this feeling that this is where we wanted to go. And we had a lot of remote employees already at that time, maybe a year and a half ago. And I think that we initially, Wilson and I wanted to say like, hey, look, this is how it feels like when you're not in the office. And this is why some teammates may not know the context of things that you're doing, how you're managing the projects, how you're talking to clients. So let's have a day where everybody can sort of experience that pain and sort of make the process better to work remotely with everybody else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's interesting. So almost I thought where you were going to go was everybody's in the office for one day and you kind of sync it all up, but it's actually the opposite, and making sure that everybody understands that it sometimes can go askew if you're not in the same place. That's interesting.
Yeah, so we basically were like doing that already, and it was a great thing. It was a great break for everybody, right? Like kind of a talk earlier before this, it was like we know that you can work from anywhere. Like being in office doesn't make you any more or less productive. It just kind of gets you more angry that you're there. So,
yeah, especially if you got to commute.
yeah. So that's kind of where Wilson. So like that's kind of what we always thought. Like, hey, like I like remote, and I think there's something great to be working remote because you find a lot of great talent. But after the pandemic, we pretty much focused all remote, and a lot of our employees are still working in New York City, but working from their apartments. And at the same time, we also have a lot of people that work, at least from my company, we have a lot of people in France, we have a lot of people in England, we have people in the West Coast. Like really, one of the benefits I tell people of remote work is now you have a great talent of people working, because there's so many more people out there that can work, and they might not apply for your job because they might think that, oh, I need to be in New York, right? But that's not true. Now I'm like, yep, you can work for anywhere, and that's great. So, but I guess for here, a normal day for a normal week for us now with whole remote is usually like Wilson and I have like a 9 a.m. meeting with each other on Monday because he's in Taiwan, so we're actually 12 hours difference between us.
Yeah.
So we can only really talk at night. So 9 a.m. for me is 9 p.m. for Wilson. So Wilson is like has a brutal schedule. He's up to like 6 p.m. to like 1 a.m. every single day in the weekday. I feel so bad.
Well, I was going to say, when you mentioned, kind of his nomad lifestyle and living all over, I was like, oh, I want his life, but no, maybe not.
It's just very brutal.
I mean, stay up all night.
It's very, very brutal. And I think like, just a quick side note, I think he wants to move back to New York, I think in a month or two, because he's just like, I've been doing this for a year. It's like tough, right?
Yeah, so, I bet. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's fun in ways, I'm sure, but yeah. So we'll have to have a happy hour with Wilson. I want to hear all his fun stories.
Oh God, yeah, he's good. Yeah. And then so basically what happens after that is we usually every Monday we have like a team sync meeting, and that's basically everyone in the company. So that's myself, Wilson. We talk about the week, what's going on, any projects we're working on, and then at the same time we have like sales meetings, and we have like basically a meeting for every sort of channel that we do, Amazon, Google, Facebook, for example. And that's with like every team leader that we have that's like manages that sort of division of the company. But really that's sort of like what we do for like agency side. And of course, we also have meetings with just like we have like internal meetings for each person's pod. So we in our company, we have pods, which is basically 4 to 5 people that work together on a bunch of accounts. And then they have internal meetings to sort of get squared up with any accounts that they do. And this structure, at least for us, works really well. It's sort of like your own personal team. Before this, we weren't doing this. We were kind of have like people mixing around, but we realized that this was kind of like, it was getting very meeting heavy, where like I would have a meeting with you have a meeting with this. And it's just like, let's just me and JJ, let's be all in the same team. That way we can talk about every single account in 1 hour versus 3 hours. So
yeah, I love that. Yeah. It's like kind of a dedicated product team. You guys work with different accounts and different clients, but it's essentially working on the same product or product line and having a product team. I love that. I think it's really effective. Yeah.
It's so much more effective. And even for us, like when we implemented it, you just see like the personalities that people just like, oh yeah, cool. Like you just see how like there's so much more camaraderie, because like you feel like a team now, and you could see like people are feeding each other's energy, and you see how it's like, okay, great. Let's do this in the other account that we work on too, because it's so much easier to just like relay that same thought, because you kind of know what you're talking about because you're in sync all the time. So,
Yep. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I found it interesting, and it, of course it depends on the type of product and maybe even the industry, but getting really meaningful customer feedback in a solely remote world, again, for some has been a little bit challenging. What have you found that works best when you're trying to get meaningful feedback from customers in a consistent way, and you have to do it? You're almost forced to do it, or if the environment lends itself to just completely remote and not being able to get out and actually kind of get in front of those customers.
Yeah. So something that we do for customer feedback. So going back to like our SaaS product, which is Metrics Box. So one thing that we've been able to do successfully there when getting feedback is, I was telling you, JJ, was like, we send out like an email that basically comes from me, the founder, says, hey, thank you for using Metrics Box. I'd love for you to just tell me what you like or don't like about the product or about the app. And it's a very simple 2 to 3 sentence email, but we get so many replies to it. Either it's like, hey, I really like the app, or hey, I don't like it because of X, Y, and Z. Or a lot of the times it's like, hey, I really wish you can add this feature because I'm using it in this unique way. And that really gives us a lot, at least for us, for Metrics Box, it gives us a ton of feedback, and that allows us to sort of put all that sort of feedback into our Trello board, which is how we manage like essentially requests or kind of like messages like this. And then our developers can see it, and then we sort of then sort it out into like what we're going to build. And that's been super useful for us. And that trick came from me when I was doing another e-commerce brand. And that's how we were able to get feedback for our e-commerce product. And that's how we were to develop our product line. So I just kind of like ported that same idea into like our SaaS app. I was like, oh, cool. Like maybe people will reply. And yeah, people love answering back and just either saying like, hey, thank you, I really like this app, or thank you, I really don't like this app. Right. So it's
which is sometimes the best feedback you might get. It's interesting. And you and I have talked offline about this, and it sounds so simple. But I love that story and that approach, because it is so simple. That's the point. We need to make it simple for our customers. Otherwise they're not going to have the time for us. Right. And so in this weird way, being remote has in some ways opened up more opportunity to interact with clients. Right. And so, when I think back on, going on site with customers and observing them and having some feedback sessions, kind of the old school, voice of customer, it was planning, and that we may have a full day with them, but it was still kind of structured in this way. I mean, literally just sending them an email and asking them for feedback. You're not going to get everyone to reply to you, but just getting some kind of informal feedback is a really good way to keep in touch with customers.
Yeah. And like, I think, and the reason why I like it too, it's because I've done everything else before too, where it's like, hey, even for here at Voy, like, let's say a client doesn't like our work, they leave us. Sometimes we send like a woofu form with like, hey, answer these 3 things. And it's like, they never respond to that. But whenever I email them like, hey, can you let me know like why you left or why you didn't like about our service? They always reply back. And it's just it just feels very natural, and not like this, oh, they're just using it to like figure out. It feels like they don't care with like a form or something like this, even though it's so useful. But sometimes like doing this stuff that doesn't really scale, and it's like you can't have your data team like analyze the responses and put into like a nice little graph. It's like, and the reason why I think about it too this way is at least for us as like product owners, it's sometimes easy to forget about this feedback if it's just like a form, because you're like, okay, let's do a review at the end of the quarter. But with this, you constantly have to like look at it and read it. And by just like reading it, you're sort of like inherently like just learning about it, because like you can't just distill it into like a simple like, I loved it or didn't like it. It's like you're truly reading what they're saying, and it makes you sort of think about their actual response more.
Yeah, absolutely. You get some of that kind of qualitative data that I think we're all kind of data heads these days, and which is great, and data is wonderful if we can actually turn it into insights, but I think we miss some of that personal kind of qualitative aspect as well. So I think that's really interesting. So another area, of course, within any business is operations, right? And so when you're fully remote, operations can, have some issues, onboarding, customer service, other areas. What have you found that tends to work well in this kind of environment?
Yeah, I think this is a really important one that we just started like developing more and more. And at least for us, when we were kind of like onboarding, and for us, like onboarding, at least too, was like onboarding clients, but at the same time was onboarding people to the team. I think we initially like remotely was a very weird thing. And for us, we hired somebody and then she was onboarded, and she was just like 9 a.m. on like a Monday. And she was just like, oh, well, what do I do? Like, do I just sit on my computer now and just like wait for someone to Slack me or ping me? It's like, it was so not structured. So now what we do when we onboard somebody is we have like a full like plan the week before they come on with like what they're going to learn, their emails, their Slack account, who their mentor is. So like having a buddy was super important for us when we're doing this sort of remote or online. But then I guess now how we do it is, you come onto the Voy Media team as like let's say a new hire, and then we go over with you on like the mission, vision, values of our company. So then that's usually myself and another product manager at the company where we go over, hey, this is what the company stands for. And again, here's what the org is like at the company. That way you know who to contact, how to contact people, and then setting you up with HR. Really, the reason why we wanted to do this was we had such a bad experience before with employees not knowing what was going on. They were sitting at their computers, not knowing who to message or talk to. And we just basically revamped our whole process. And I think like any business, it's like we learn and you get feedback from your employees saying, hey, was your onboarding good or was it not good? And it's like, okay, like this is what we need to figure out. Same thing with developers. Like I think when we were onboarding developers, we have to show them, I think for developers a little bit different. We just show them like the code base and the GitHub and the repositories. Hey, here are all the keys, the licenses that you need. Here's how to set up your dev environment. And initially for us, very easy when you're in person at like a job, you can just sit next to them, but very different when you're like doing like remote and Zoom where you have to like share screen. And it's like, okay, like why isn't this code working on your computer where it's like more like this like remote type of onboarding and we're trying to get better at it. But that's sort of like one way we think about it for that. And how we track that all is we just use Asana and we basically have really divided everything into like a task and say, okay, do they have the keys for this? Do they have the password for this? Okay, what stage are they on? Are they in like knowing the company stage? Okay, after that stage, are they into like onboarding and process stage? Next stage is, okay, do they have all the training materials? Okay, let's go make sure that they actually the courses that we need them to take before they start developing product or start like onboarding working with clients. And that's kind of like how we've done it. So, but what we found kind of works the best there is just having, at least for us, someone dedicated to really bring them up to speed. I think before what we were doing was like everybody in the team was doing a little bit of it. And we found out that like one person was kind of like busy and it's like, oh, okay, like I forgot about it. Can you do it? Can you like help him onboard him for the keys? But now we just have a dedicated person to just do everything from A to Z. And we found that to be so much better.
That's great. Yeah. I've been interested to see some of the, trending topics out there in the last year or so about, how do you onboard these new employees? Because I mean, onboarding employees is such an important thing to begin with, just period. And then when you have to do it remotely, it's just this odd. It's much more interesting and difficult than just somebody who's worked with you for a while, turning them to remote. So that's some good advice about that, keeping them engaged and making sure that they know. Love the idea of kind of having a mentor or a dedicated person to them. I think that's really important.
And I think too, like similar to what you're saying before, I think for us initially it was a little bit harder for us where like maybe now or like maybe in a year from now it'll be easier because people are going to be used to this remote sort of work. In the beginning, like during the pandemic, when a lot of people weren't used to this remote stuff, they didn't really know what to expect. And now people are like, okay, I kind of know what to expect. Like, oh, okay, we use Slack for everything. Okay, this is how you guys talk, right? Like this is where everything lives, right? So, okay, I see now. Where before it's like, why aren't we talking in person? Right. So,
yep. Absolutely. So, okay. So here's one that's close to my heart. When you do onboard someone and you do hire someone, or even maybe they've changed roles or just need to upskill a bit. When you have a team member that needs to learn about product management, right? What do they need to do in their role, or how does their role interact with product management? Any secrets you found to help them build their learning library, especially in this remote world?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I always recommend to people, as like even for me, like if they read it or they don't read it, or at least if they've done it before, to just pick it up again. I really love that book by Eric Ries. I recommend it to almost everybody, which is The Lean Startup. Have you heard of that? I mean, so you've heard of it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So the reason why I like it is because it's really about like that build, measure, learn feedback loop. And that's kind of like how we think about product here in just sort of like anything in general when we're building up product for our SaaS app, or we're thinking about processes for our clients, or even some of the tests we're doing for the ads. It's still about this building, measuring, learning. So I think the book, The Lean Startup, really talks about this and really sort of shows how it's done. And I tell people all the time, like it's probably one of the best books that you could be reading, just to learn this like sort of MVP approach to building product.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a good one. One of the things that I found interesting, again, over the last year or so is 2020 and 2021, basically, we've at Sequent have done training and advising around product management for 20 years now. And up until, again, probably early 2020, I would say 90% of what we did with clients were in person, was in person. So we would do trainings, on site. And so we were, I remember back in March of 2020, I had 5 weeks in a row of traveling all over the country and all over the world that I was canceling because of COVID. And I thought, oh my gosh, 5 weeks of not traveling. How will I ever do that? And now we're, 17 months later. And it's like, oh my God, I still haven't traveled. Point being, when it first all kind of came together, we thought, oh my gosh, we're an in-person business. What are we going to do? Well, the truth is, we can do virtual workshops. We can do virtual trainings. We can do virtual coaching. It all really works. It takes some time to get it right. And I think we probably made some mistakes in the beginning. But you can pretty much do anything in a remote way. You just have to make sure that you chop it up enough and you don't make people sit on a Zoom for 8 hours and, those sorts of things, right? But yeah, it's been interesting to see the learning curve and the learning industry, if you will, right? And how and not that virtual, teaching and training is any kind of new thing, but I do think it kind of like you said earlier, you were forced into the new mode. A lot of companies and a lot of educational tools were forced into at least hastening their online and virtual worlds. And, it's interesting. I think people have at least embraced the change more than I thought maybe they would. So I think it's interesting. So anybody out there who is still learning and wanting to learn some things, find some good books, as Kevin said. Find some online and virtual webinars and trainings. And there's paid stuff, there's free stuff. There's all kinds of really good content and thought leadership out there that you can continue to learn even while you're sitting at home or sitting on your back porch.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is so important. I think learning has changed so much. And what I call it now is like, it's got to be like edutainment, which is like educational, but entertaining.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. It's like, because there's some good, like I'm looking at YouTube videos, like learning about like past companies and like the way they edit the videos, the way they put the graphics. I'm like, whoa, this is like entertaining and you're learning. And that is the new way, I think, where it's like, you have to spice it up a little bit because it's very boring to just like hear a lecture. But if you add nice graphics, if you like interject like things you might not know about, it's like, oh, whoa, I didn't think about it like that. So that's how
exactly.
Yeah, that's how I think about it.
Absolutely. And what's also interesting on the flip side is I'm thinking about how we're going to go back in person at some point. And I think we will go back in person. And so again, if you were just look at Sequence Business as a microcosm, let's say we did 90% in person. I think it'll probably be no more than 50% in person, after when the new normal comes to be. That's just my prediction. I don't know for sure. But I'm hoping, I'm putting this out in the universe right now. I'm hoping, and I actually have it on my calendar scheduled to do what we call a public training, which is basically any product managers can come from any organization, as opposed to going into an organization and just training their product managers. I've put a public in-person training on the calendar for New York City in October of 2021. So everybody
nice.
out there listening, put good vibes in the universe. Go get your vaccines if you so choose, and let's get there, because I'm thinking it'll be an interesting thing when we can have an event again, when we can have a small training again, and everybody will be looking around each other and like, wow, we're in the same room. How weird is this?
Yeah, oh my God,
but it'll be fun.
Yeah, I think it'll be so fun. I think people are just like by August. I also think that it'll be ready. I mean, I got my vaccine 2 weeks ago, so I'm pretty excited.
I got mine in late February, March. So
nice.
I'm
excited.
Hey, we can hang out and have a drink together.
Yeah, exactly. I tell people all the time, like, go get it. Like, I want to go out again, like, and do stuff.
Exactly.
But yeah, these events, like, I think these events are gonna like come back like roaring. Like, people are gonna feed for this energy to meet with other people, learn, like, especially, and the thing too, that's why like I think online is great, but there's something still to be said about meeting your instructor in person. It's kind of like a celebrity, right? It's like you like watching them, but like there's like when you see them, you're like, oh my God, or it's like, so I think people want to go to these events because I think it just connects you even more to that like educator that you've been learning from.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. So, it's interesting. This has been a great conversation. I think just to kind of summarize your points, and remote work can work. can work well. It can be optimized for the environment. There are always pros and cons to it, but I think that what we collectively have learned over the last year or so, we can take some of that forward. And it's all about our customers, it's all about our employees, and making that environment work as much as possible. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a great conversation. I know everyone out there is kind of looking forward to getting back in person at some point. But I do think remote is here to stay for sure in many circles. So this has been a great conversation. And thank you again for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, JJ. I appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Masters of Product Management powered by Sequent Learning Networks. I am JJ Rory, and I look forward to speaking with you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Masters of Product Management powered by Sequent Learning Networks. If you'd like to take your career to the next level with additional tools, training, coaching, and books, be sure to visit Sequent Learning Networks at sequentlearning.com.